Urban warfare and close quarters combat is one of the most popularly discussed areas of combat operations. Because of that, the Army has published an Urban Operations Manual, which is in excess of 300 pages, in addition to their Mount Manual, which is about the same size. My point being, there's far too much to cover in this format, so we will cover the bare principles or the essential principles that you need to understand to be able to effectively operate in the urban and close quarters environment. The first principle I want to talk about is related slightly to violence of action, but it applies directly to when you enter a building or any doorway. There's a specific term that most people are familiar with, that is the fatal funnel. The fatal funnel refers to the bottleneck effect that a door has upon a building. Everyone has to pass through it, and it's very easy to concentrate a high volume of fire in that opening. This makes that funnel fatal. In order to reduce the fatalities that you will incur while entering or breaching a doorway, you must pass through the fatal funnel as quickly as possible. This is accomplished through a concept which I like to refer to as the smoke or water concept of entering a room. Different schools of urban operations teach different methods, from very complex, pre-selected angles of attack when you enter a particular building. That is, everyone goes a certain way and it's always that same way. We're going to avoid that, however, because it doesn't lend itself very well to the real-world situation you'll encounter when you enter a building or an urban environment. The smoke or water concept that I'm talking about relates to the nature that smoke or water has to flow around obstacles. Water and smoke both take the path of least resistance, whether it's smoke rising from a fire and going whichever way the wind drives it, or water flowing somewhere and simply moving around obstacles. The principle is the same. It's the path of least resistance. This is the key to the smoke or water concept of entering a building. You take the path of least resistance. When that door opens, there's no guarantee that your pre-chosen path will be a clear one, or one that provides the best cover and the best field of view for possible threats in that room. That is why when that door is breached, you simply take the path of least resistance. Whether it's to the right or the left, you take it and you cover your vectors, or you cover the best field of view and watch for enemy threats. The person behind you, entering behind you, takes this same principle, however they go in the opposite direction that you have taken. So if the door is breached and the path of least resistance is to the right, the next person should take their path of least resistance to the left, and so forth. Now, the reason this is so important is because you must pass through the fatal funnel as quickly as possible. You need to get your entire fire team to that doorway in seconds flat. Otherwise, you're just going to be a lot of dead bodies in the doorway. So the smoke or water principle allows you to quickly and aggressively flow through that doorway and spread out into the room just as water flows through and spreads out. Now, once you've entered the room and you've followed your path of least resistance, there are predetermined stopping points to be aware of. These stopping points are the positions that give you the best field of view over the greatest area of the room. If you're the first person in, this is generally somewhere just past the midway point into the room, by one of the corners on either side. If you'll check the references, there's diagrams that'll make this a little bit easier to understand. But the important thing to remember is you flow into the room quickly, get through that fatal funnel, and take up positions which allow you to cover any possible threat area within that room. A threat area is anywhere where an enemy could be hiding or any location an enemy could come from, such as another doorway or a window within that room. Once again, communication is key, as with any combat operation. The first person in that room must relay verbally back to the rest of the fire team how big the room is and basically how many people are needed to secure it. The typical way to do this from the school that I was trained from is to cry short room if it's small. Short room means only half the fire team is going in if it's 4 people, so only 2 people. Whatever words you use, make sure that everyone in the fire team is aware what they are and what they mean, and make sure that you communicate that loudly back to everyone. As long as you do this, you'll never get 4 people piling into, let's say, a tiny bathroom, or 2 people only going into a room which needs the full 4 to cover. Once you've entered the room and have established that all visible threats have been neutralized, it's up to the fire team leader to recall you back into your stack or the formation you've been using to move through this building, assess that there are no booby traps or anything of that nature in your way, and proceed through on your mission, whichever direction that may be. When you approach a door and you're preparing to breach it, the person who's closest to the door is responsible to make sure that there aren't any visible booby traps on that door. Now the things to watch for are pretty obvious: wires and connection plates, pressure plates. It's important you don't spend too much time standing in front of that door, because doors don't stop bullets in reality, so it's a bad habit to stand in front of it. And we want it to be as quick as possible, so you don't want to spend a lot of time lollygagging in front of a door trying to find if there's wires and such. Get to the door, make sure it's safe, and signal that you are ready to breach. It's up to the fire team leader to have pre-selected the person in charge of breaching doors. It's important that everyone knows how to do it, but for the sake of speed and efficiency, one person should be the designated breacher within the fire team. And when you're stacking up next to the door, it's important that everyone is as close as possible without being an encumbrance to one another. Whatever method you use to do this, make sure that everyone in the fire team is familiar with it and that you practice it together before the operation. When you approach the door, get close to the wall and then signal that you're ready to breach. The breacher will use his preferred method to open the door, at which point everyone pours through in that smoke or water method as quickly as possible, the breacher being the last person to go through the door. Once you have flowed into the room swiftly and aggressively and have secured it, the fire team leader regathers his fire team back to the formation he had selected, and you continue to travel through the building. Now, as you're moving through a building, there's a few key concepts or terms to always keep in mind. The first is pieing corners. Now, when I refer to pieing a corner, that means exposing yourself only at a slice of a time as you look a slice at a time around the corner, like slices of a pie. This can be done quite swiftly and is not necessarily a lengthy process. However, if there's a known threat in an area, it can be slowed down. The reason you pie a corner is because you reduce your exposure. That means you reduce the amount of your body that the enemy can see while maximizing the amount of the enemy that you can see, or the area that you're about to go into. Pieing is something that you need to be doing constantly around every corner, and you'll soon find it's second nature and doesn't take a great deal of effort to effectively pie around a corner as you're moving through an area. Now, as in any combat operation, distance is generally your friend. It gives you more time to aim, and it increases the chance that the enemy will miss you. The same principle holds true in an urban or close quarters situation. As you are traveling through the building, commence pieing at the maximum distance you can effectively assure that that area is clear. This will keep you safer and will deny the enemy the proximity that he needs to kill you quickly. When you're approaching a corner especially, it's important that you have established it's clear long before you get to that corner. Once you're to the corner, you're too close to use your main weapon in airsoft engagement rules, and you'll be required to switch to a sidearm or a bladed weapon of some kind. He will also be close enough to remove your weapon from you. What I'm talking about is, let's say you're leading around corners with your muzzle. The first thing he's going to see is your muzzle. You can't see him yet. All he has to do is wait for the rest of your body to come around and touch you with that knife, and you're out of the fight. So it's important to remember to make sure that areas are clear long before you approach them. This is accomplished by pieing corners and also using angles of attack or angles of cover correctly. When I refer to angles of attack or angles of cover, I mean the angle that you physically can see and cover with your weapon, and the angle of attack is your angle of motion. When you're going down the hall, and let's say you're following the left side, you should actually be slightly tilted to the right and looking through doorways and corners on that side, and the person on your opposite side should be doing the inverse of what you're doing. Essentially, your vectors of fire crisscross as you move. The reason this is done is because you can see what is around the corners on your opposite side before the person on that side of the hall can. Once again, the diagrams and further learning references make this a little bit easier to understand when you actually see what I'm talking about. But essentially, you want it to move so that your angle gives you the best field of view around obstacles. This will deny the enemy locations that they might be hiding in. Once you're inside a building, it's important that you establish where your objective is and that you go to it as quickly as possible, unless your mission is to clear the entire building. As you're traveling down a hallway or through doors, and if you don't have the time to clear these doors, you need to travel through this building as silently as possible to avoid engaging unnecessary enemies on your way to your objective. If your mission, however, is to clear the entire building, then speed is the absolute key, and you need to cover the entire building room from room as fast as possible, because as soon as you hit the front door, everyone in the building is probably going to know you're there. I want to quickly revisit the concept of violence of action once again because it's so critical in urban operations. From the aggression at which you pass through the fatal funnel to the aggression at which you cover a room and enter it. Violence of action and the speed at which you execute these procedures will dictate whether or not you get killed in that building or you take the building and are able to accomplish the mission. Right along with that, you need to make sure that you don't get sloppy and stop pieing your corners and watching the angles to make sure that there isn't someone hiding around the next corner or concealing themselves in debris within the room. It's very much a dynamic that you must balance. You have to balance speed and aggression with precision and making sure the areas are clear. When you do it properly, urban operations comes down to a few very simple points. And if you follow these simple points, you can effectively operate. One final note is practice. Practice is what makes the difference between a fumbling airsofter and a high-speed operator in the urban environment. It's the same basic principles, but it's practice that makes them perfect. There's a concept that slow is smooth and smooth is fast, and this very much applies to this. Take the time to practice these maneuvers, practice flowing into a room, practice moving around objects in a way that gives you the best field of view around them. And this slow and smooth practice will then allow you to be fast and furious as you enter a building, and you can overwhelm the objective by speed, tactics, and well-placed and executed maneuvers.